Hi, I'm David Petz, and I'll be your host in today's panel discussion, Steering Your Business Through the Headwinds of COVID-19. I've been the Chief Revenue Officer at two mid-sized growth businesses, Shutterstock and ShoreTel, as well as leading go-to-market for large divisions of Nokia, HP, and Compaq. In the last 12 years or so, I've successfully battled through economic turbulence as well as market shifts, and I've taken the business from on-premise to SaaS. Together, more interesting challenges and obstacles to deal with than most people get thrown at them throughout their career. That said, I suspect it's only a fraction of what my guests have had to face in the last 9 months or so. I'm joined today by two fabulous leaders from great companies. Mary McDowell, President and Chief Executive Officer at Mitel. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, David.
And Nick Mehta, Chief Executive Officer at Gainsight. Welcome to you too.
David, great to be here. Thank you.
Well, let me briefly explain, and I'll come to each of you to do a better job than I will, but Mitel is a global market leader in business communications, powering more than 2 billion connections with their cloud, enterprise, and next generation collaboration applications. And Gainsight, of course, is the leading customer success platform provider, empowering hundreds of customer-focused businesses to deliver outcomes and exceptional experiences every day. So if I may, I'm going to dive straight into this by asking Mary first. Maybe you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about Mitel, and set the context for the panel discussion as we go.
Great. Thanks, David, and thanks for the opportunity. So I have been the CEO of Mitel since October of 2019, and it has been a phenomenally rewarding challenge to lead a modern communications company through the challenges of the current pandemic. We provide communication and collaboration systems, both SaaS-based and traditional premise equipment for primarily mid-sized companies, but companies that transcend all industries. So from our standpoint, it's been a real catbird seat to see the impact of not only the impact of the virus, but also the economic challenges, the resiliency of businesses of all sizes, to meet the demands of their customers under very trying circumstances. And we were privileged to have the opportunity to support their communications requirements, particularly during the rapid shift to work from home.
Yeah, no kidding. You've been in a sort of perfect spot, both to handle it internally as well as help your customers externally. So Nick, maybe I could ask you the same question, a brief introduction, tell us a bit about yourself and Gainsight.
Absolutely, yeah. So Gainsight, we're all about helping businesses that have recurring relationships with their customers, whether you think of SaaS or subscription or cloud, anyone that has an ongoing relationship with their customer, drive better success for their customers and better experiences. And in the process, keep their customers longer, get them to spend more money and be better advocates. And obviously in the downturn, people were even more focused than ever on keeping their existing customers, which is where our mission's focused.
Yeah, no doubt that sort of revenue protection as much as growth, and different for different people. I know some businesses have had the good fortune of opportunity presented by the pandemic. Others have had, the misfortune of a complete downturn if they're, representing customers in, travel, for example, or hospitality areas. So I'm going to sort of jump around a little bit, and hopefully, we'll take it in turns to get to the questions. But maybe we'll kick off with Mary again. And when the guidance for sort of tackling the pandemic was first issued, and particularly the stay-at-home, shelter-at-home orders were put in place, what were the first sort of immediate changes you had to make?
The first order of business for us was protection of, I guess even before, when we sort of sensed things were happening in Asia back in the January, February timeframe, the immediate order of business was protecting supply chain routes and making sure that we were going to be able to continue to deliver phones and other equipment to our customers. And it wasn't clear then that this was going to be a worldwide event. I think at that time people thought it was going to be pretty much confined potentially only to China or certainly to Asia. But then as it became clear that this was a worldwide phenomenon, it was just a tsunami, not to bring in another disaster, tsunami of requests for customers that have been happily working in their offices to rapidly shift to work from home. And so fortunately, our systems are designed to enable that shift, but a lot of our customers had not really put in the operational plans to make it happen. So a lot of work by the field guys, the SEs and others to work with customers to make that shift. You know, sometimes in pretty trying circumstances, you know, in some places where the connections aren't that great, you know, how do you move your contact center people to a work from home environment? And so a lot of very region specific challenges depending on the connectivity options.
Yeah, no, and it's certainly a very interesting point, as you said, about, you know, in your space in particular, and I don't know whether the same is true for you, Nick, as much, but the physical supply chain for some of the devices that you have to put out there to enable the solution to happen is something I hadn't thought of when we were sort of pulling this together. So Nick, same question to you. Perhaps you can sort of you know, tell us a little bit about what were the immediate changes you had to tackle with your company.
Yeah, well, we're I think fortunate to be a pure digital business, so we don't have anything physical that we make or deal with at all, which is lucky. Except dealing with the physical Wi-Fi in our house now, which is it's a whole separate problem as a parent with some young kids. So we'll talk about that later. For us, you know, actually, I remember end of February, we didn't have the Asia pre-warning. Actually, Mary, that's awesome that you knew a little bit more in advance. And so end of February, we actually had our company kickoff in Phoenix. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we were all together, and it was this amazing moment of high fives and non-social distancing that was, of course, now a time in the past. And but we talked about, well, you know, there's this COVID thing, and if it happens, you know, we have this big customer event, which we could talk more about in a little bit, but in May. And so our big event every year, which is this big, you know, the previous year had been 6,000 people. And so that one of the biggest things we had to do very tactically was how we actually move our events in that event specifically to virtual. So that was one thing we can talk about. And then what we did was for our employees, after COVID became more of a reality in the US, we built kind of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar with that concept from psychology, a pyramid. And we said, what's the most foundational thing? So number one was the financial viability of the company. Now, luckily we're well funded and, you know, all that stuff. So, but we had to make sure we didn't mess anything up. And then number two is making sure our teammates were safe and secure and sane as much as possible, given COVID. And then number three was support our clients during this challenging time, because clients had a lot of things going on. And especially given what we do, customer success, we have to practice what we preach. And so we kind of rolled out strategies in each of those. We called that the survive part of the business. And then we talked about how as we got through those three layers, we'll move on to the thrive part of the business, which is all the things we originally planned to do this year, right? In our strategy and all that. And so we did that. And now we're kind of squarely into that thrive part of the strategy.
That's fantastic. And I think I heard you in the middle of that say, try to keep your employees sane.
Absolutely.
A lot of us, we've been dealing with how to keep sane throughout all of this. But,
so challenging. Yeah, very important.
No kidding. Hey, I'm going to Nick first on this one, because I think Mary had an advantage in this particular case. But tell me a little bit, Nick, about the sort of tools and systems and capabilities you had or perhaps didn't have, and how quickly you were able to turn them on to enable a totally, you know, virtual workforce and you know, enable everybody to continue to be productive from their homes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think that we were very fortunate that we were already, in addition to being totally digital, we were very distributed already. So we had some offices, you know, maybe 8 offices throughout the world, but we had lots of people that work from home. And because we had a lot of offices, there was never a meeting in Gainsight near history that was just in one room. It never happened, right? So we were used to, you know, video conferencing and all that stuff that Mary's team does very well. That stuff wasn't as complicated, but the two things we focused on, one was learning from the people that did this all the time, namely our teammates that work from home. So one of the most tactical things we did was we turned it around and said, teach all of us, including teach me, how we actually work from home and what are the tips and all that. So that was very early on what we did. And then the second thing is, I think a lot of the nuance on how to use the technology. So as an example, you know, trying to mix in breakout rooms with the big meetings, which we try to do a lot of. Using the chat feature inside the video conferencing to keep kind of an ongoing dialogue as kind of a side-by-side. Try to more actively moderate meetings, because otherwise you have like 10 people and it's like, well, who's going to talk next? And everyone's waiting for the next person to talk. So I think we've gotten a lot of those nuanced skills, mainly just by learning and doing. And then we also try to apply those then, of course, externally to our client meetings as well, which we could talk more about. But I think there's a lot of art we've learned about how do you engage with customers in this type of situation.
Yeah, it certainly, you know, I'm going to ask you the same question in a moment, Mary, but Nick, you mentioned in there there's a lot of sort of teaching each other, and we're going to sort of move into that in a moment. But were there any sort of aha moments you had that, notwithstanding the fact that you had a fairly virtual or disparate team in the first place, were there any sort of aha moments about how you had to do things differently now? There was literally no sort of cooler gatherings or water, space sort of gatherings.
Yeah, I think there was a couple things. One, I had an aha at the end of the first day working from home personally. I am an extremely high energy person. Most people would say like one of the most high energy people they've ever met. And I felt totally sapped at the end of the first day because I sat in this chair and just like looked at the screen, and I did exactly what I was told. All my video conferencing meetings, I checked everything off, and I felt terrible at the end of the day. So what I switched to, which I've now become a big proponent of, is I do a huge number of walking meetings, and I actually post on, we use Slack internally, I post on Slack every day kind of what happened that day, but then how many steps I had. And it's sort of like a bit of a kind of a joke. Nick, how many steps do you have so far? And actually one day I got to almost 30,000 steps, which was like 15 miles. So I'm putting in some real exercise and getting a lot of just mental space. And of course, then I convert some of the video conferences to calls. And so that was like one thing, is like managing your own like mental state, including for the CEO. That was like one aha for me. Yeah. And then a second aha was a positive, which is it's not all negative. Like we are certainly surrounded by lots of negatives in the world right now, but inside negatives are positives. One thing that I feel like we're doing a much better job of is being more inclusive. Because before, you had people in the office and other people dialing in, and, it's hard for them to hear what was going on. And people were laughing and they couldn't tell if they were laughing at them or laughing in the meeting or what. And, then also the meetings before tended to like have a few voices speak up all the time. And so I think because with video conferencing, honestly, and just generally the new world, way more voices are being heard than before. So those are two things that were aha moments.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There's some pretty interesting stuff in there in terms of, particularly in that sort of participation piece you were just talking about at the end then. So what about you, Mary? Obviously the nature of your business should have given you a good step up in terms of, enabling the tools, but tell me a little bit about how you had to react.
Yeah, from a tool standpoint, I think we were well equipped, but as Nick points out, it's the mental orientation and the culture that you really have to pay attention to. And like you sit there and you're in 12 hours of video calls and you're like, I know I need to get up and move around, but I am just wiped out. And so, I started just tracking my steps just to see how bad it was. And at the end of one day, it was like 700.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, this is ridiculous. And so I started doing the walking meetings as well, even though, in the summer, it's warm, you come back and you're kind of disheveled for the next call, but it's like, yeah, that's all right. I can handle that. We did have to start paying attention to employees' mental health and offering seminars because, particularly for people with young kids, very, very stressful. There are also situations where we had to sort of rethink our posture about who could be in an office and who couldn't. So for people running like the network operations and things like that, we had capability for them to come in the office in a safe way. But there were other folks, this one gentleman reached out to me, inside sales in Texas, wife at home, kids at home. So he's operating from his garage, but it's Texas, it's 110 degrees. It's like, okay, that's not humane. We need to do something about this. So you need to be sensitive to those types of situations. But like Nick, I think the biggest gift for us has been the gift of time. Coming in as a new CEO, what does a new CEO do? She wants to build her team and figure out her vision and where she's going to drive the company. And that involves a lot of executive collaboration. And normally you're twisting people's arms. I need you to move that meeting because my meeting's here and you can't fly here, blah, blah, blah. It's pretty easy now, right? You can have, and in some ways it's harder because you don't have the dinner or some cocktails after the meeting to say, how did that really land? And certainly as we were executing things, it's easier to do it remotely. Strategy and visioning, a little more difficult, but at least we now have the time to do it properly. And so that's one thing I'm going to miss when we go back to hopping on planes all the time, if in fact we do that in the near future. Because it has been nice to have that degree of flexibility.
No, I hear you both on the steps, and you're both looking fabulous, by the way. So it hasn't been too bad to you both. So good for you in making it more mobile as you get into it. And both of you sort of touched on my next question in part, but how did your communication and sort of engagement style have to change to keep connected with all your employees? And we're going to move into customers in a moment, another obviously critical audience, but with your broader teams, what did you have to do to change that and remain engaged? Tell me a little bit about that. Maybe we'll jump to Nick again, give you a breather, Mary.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one of the things I've been thinking about in general is that you have to constantly be evolving your strategy for all these topics because things change so much. I mean, gosh, what did we think about COVID in March versus January versus now? But one of the things that we did implement because of that need for evolution is basically a more frequent cadence for a lot of things. So as a couple examples, so I have I've always forever sent an email to the company every Sunday night for literally 15, 20 years of running teams. I've always had that. But I added this daily Slack post just to give, honestly, people a little bit of like, I'm here, we're engaged, especially in the early days of COVID. And actually people liked it. And so now it's just part of my rhythm. And actually it's a way for me to sort of debrief on whether I did anything today or not, besides getting some steps in. And so that's like one thing is sort of like increasing the frequency. Another thing is I tried to be more present, with our employees. As an example, we have a weekly we call it like a huddle. It's like an all hands, but it's optional. It's just kind of get together and we have different presentations. And before I would, I would be in it sometimes and obviously had a lot of other meetings. So I'd often be double booked and not join. And I've actually tried to do more of it to sort of just show my face to the team and make sure they saw me. And it has been a great opportunity. We started bringing kind of guests on. Today we interviewed, as an example, the two women who started a venture fund focused on underrepresented entrepreneurs. And so it gave us a chance to like actually bring some innovation and inspiration into sort of the weekly routine. So kind of more frequency, more presence on my part, and then obviously trying to push my executive team to do the same.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I, Mary, you mentioned particularly trying to get to bond and get a high performing team. Oftentimes you spend time, obviously in a very sort of business oriented environment, but then there's sometimes dinners and sort of offline opportunities to check how things went down and so forth. So tell me a little bit about how your engagement style had to change, and not just for your direct team. I know you're a very sort of present person across the company. So tell me a little bit about not just the direct team, but more broadly across the company as well.
Yeah. So Nick, my emails go out on Friday afternoons.
Oh, wow.
So same kind of thing, but I used to talk about where I was, what customers I saw, blah, blah, blah. And so when you're in the same room week after week, it actually got a little bit more personal, which normally I communicate a lot, but I'm kind of a private person. So that was sort of a new muscle for me, just to kind of, share the experience that we're all collectively going through and how we're all dealing with it. It's starting to engage the team, particularly as I was bringing new leaders on and how to get them introduced and positioned. And then starting to be thoughtful about how we communicate the state of the business and being very transparent. So I like to be as transparent as I possibly can. And as a private company, we don't have the constraints of a public company in terms of sharing what was going on with employees, but also bringing in our sponsors to have them share some of their expectations. So it's not just, me telling them what's working and what is expected of us, but also hearing from the owners, I think has been helpful to people. So it's I think a more deliberate effort than it has been in the past. And then we're always like retuning in terms of, are we doing enough? Is there understanding here? And then, I think because people in the past had such constrained schedules because of the travel and this, that, and the other, you try to be respectful. I'm not respectful at all anymore. I text people all the time. I call them. And I think it's just much more of an informal kind of cadence because that's what we just have to do now.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I'm interested, do either of you feel that the quantity, frequency, or the reach of your communications has got broader? Are you doing more of it than you did before? And I'm sort of, psychologically thinking that, when you see people in the office, you feel like you've seen them, you've somewhat connected. But now you don't see anybody. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, I've really got to put more effort into this because you're just not seeing people all the time. So more or less or about the same?
No, I think it's more. And, you know, one of the other side benefits, you know, you say we have all these tools, but people have gotten a lot more interested in the roadmaps for these tools. So, you know, before, well, it was just something that we were marketing to customers. Now we are like living and breathing these tools. So now when a new capability comes out on our video system or something, people are emailing the engineers or commenting on it or sort of, you know, looking for the new stuff. So that's been kind of fun to sort of get everybody enrolled in what it is we offer.
Yeah, no, that's great. What about you, Nick? I mean, you said a little bit, you picked up the cadence, you sort of increased the frequency. Do you feel like your communication has become even more sort of critical for you? I mean, it's
totally. No, I tell all our leaders that like this is like the greatest leadership training in the history of business this year, and one of it's like you have to be great at communication. And I think part of it, you have to be more frequent, be more authentic, more vulnerable, more about your personal side. Everything Mary said. I think another thing that I've been thinking a lot about is you don't get those informal interactions with people that don't work with you directly anymore. And so you almost have to do it even more, because before you might see somebody who as a CEO who doesn't report to you, who's 3 layers down in the org chart, in the coffee room, or you might see them at a company event, or you might see them at a customer, right? And I don't see that at all anymore. And so therefore my communications are literally the only way that they would at all know who I am and have any connection. So it's super important now. And I've been thinking about over time, are there ways to reproduce the serendipity of meeting in offices and things like that in this virtual world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the hardest things have been just that the future is unknowable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a scary time, right? Because you have all these great plans, but it can change on a dime. And so it's a balance in the communication of you want to portray a steady hand and there's a great future, but inside you're like, all right, I have, 5 alternate plans in my head based on whatever scenario comes to pass. And so it's a little bit of jujitsu, balancing that.
Totally.
Yeah. And strangely, this is something that's totally universal for all people in the company. Whereas, oftentimes you might have particular things that are facing the engineering community, but not necessarily the sales team, and so that different people have got heightened or less sensitivity to the communication than others. But now everyone's facing the same thing, so it's a very strong common thread, which I think could be helpful.
Yes.
So turning our sort of focus now away from the internal team and to another hugely important audience, of course, your customers. Maybe you could share a little bit about particularly, I don't know whether you call it the sales motion, but how did your companies, typically engage with customers prior to the pandemic coming along? Because that'll be the sort of foundation from which we build on the change. So maybe Mary, you can pick it off. What was the sort of sales motion? I know that maybe different segments and different sales motions or ways of engaging with customers for different segments, but maybe set the scene for us there.
Yeah, well, we sell almost exclusively through reseller partners. So a big part of our sales motion is engagement with the partners. So calling on them, hosting training events, hosting joint marketing things. And of course, that all had to shift to a virtual. Particularly in our European theater, we have many larger accounts. And so come into our demo center, let us show you all the goodies. And that has been a very persistent theme of the European guys saying, can 2 of us just go back in the demo center? We promise it'll be safe. And as European countries have started to open up, we have started to do that in a safe way. But it has been a reimagining. But I think the biggest shift for us was the account teams really understanding some of the new requirements of the customers and turning on a dime. When else are you going to bring up a greenfield hospital communication system in a week? But there were pop-up hospitals, there were pop-up government agencies to deal with distribution of funds and things like that in various municipalities. I had a situation where one customer pinged me on LinkedIn. And so I'm surfing late at night in bed, which I know you're not supposed to do. And I see his message and he said, hey, we need to go remote overnight Can you help us? And if we do it quickly, we will make sure we don't miss a beat in distributing lunches to students who otherwise wouldn't eat.
Wow.
Well, you know, I get that out to somebody, you know, within a day, you know, we've got them virtual, the kids get fed, and then we can share that with the rest of the employee base who's like, wow, I'm so proud to work for a company whose business has that kind of impact. And so it was, I just couldn't be prouder of the field teams for the way they stepped up and really worked out whatever sort of custom response was needed. And then there was probably no more well-received part of the communication, particularly in April and May, than some of these stories of things we're doing for our customers.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I've worked in your space a little bit, and so I can certainly empathize with bringing up a greenfield, you know, hospital, as you said, in that, you know, tighter time frame is a non-trivial task, but clearly one that's, you know, hugely beneficial and needed. So that sort of rapid response must have been quite a learning curve, and in some ways, I'm not saying that people will want to be under that kind of time constraint and pressure all the time, but it may have helped you sort of realize, you know, how quickly things can be done, where, you know, you might break through some obstacle or some perceived obstacles that existed before about, you know, how long and how, you know, challenging some of these things are.
I think that's right. And, you know, we are a Gainsight customer, and actually you guys have a very effective renewal process, I have to say. But, you know, some of that data there, you started to see some of the pain, particularly at the small end of the customer base. So people going bankrupt, people needing to stretch their cash, you know, so it gave you a much richer understanding of the real economic impact of this, as I said, particularly on the smaller customers.
Yeah, no, that's a much more challenging side of the turbulence we're facing, for sure. So Nick, maybe the same, you know, question to you. Tell us a little bit about the sort of customer engagement approach in Gainsight, particularly prior to the pandemic, and some of the things that you've done, you know, as the pandemic has forced change upon you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mary, thanks for being quiet. So I'm engaging with you right now, so that's good. With a few others to engage with. So we have, you know, our approach for folks that don't know has largely been actually around kind of building community and thought leadership as the sort of marketing vehicle, and then having a direct sales team to sell to customers. The community was actually challenging of how do you translate that online, because as David has been to some of our events, it was, you know, big events and small events all around the world, and thousands of dinners and, you know, conferences and so on. And then the sales motion was more your classic enterprise sales, you know, fly to see somebody in the office and do a big presentation and so on. And so we had to kind of convert both of those into the more digital model. Good news is actually it's very, very parallel to what Mary talked about with respect to how you use your own technology. Like it was fun in that most of our technology broadly is about customer engagement using technology. So we got to use our own tech to do some of this. On the marketing side, you know, the community side, we had to convert a lot of these events into virtual events. And I'm sure there's tons of you know, thought leadership out there now about virtual events. One of the big things we did was try to bring our personality and brand to these events, so they didn't just feel like a webinar, you know, video meeting or whatever, right? And so we for folks that have been to our events before, they're always silly and kind of have some kind of a little bit of our own company personality in them. Like, for example, every year I rewrite a song, pop song and make it about customer success. And so we did that again this year, country music song. I took Garth Brooks' Friends in Low Places and made it Trends in Support Cases. And actually, you had to be there, but people liked it. And so we did that.
I hope it's recorded somewhere. You say
it is on YouTube. We've done
somewhere
dozens of these over the years. Yeah. And so we did, you know, try to just make it feel like, okay, there's still like a soul in what you're doing on the marketing side, right? And then on the customer engagement side, both, you know, potential and existing customers, we really leaned into what we preach, right? Which is using digital to engage more. For example, we've got this technology that helps create automated personalized journeys for customers based on their behavior and things like that. So it feels like somebody's reaching out to you, even though some of it's automated. And we have another technology that's all about driving growth inside the product itself. People call it product-led growth. How do you make the product sell itself fundamentally? And so we leaned into that. And obviously doing that was great because then you get the benefit price similar to Mary's team, where you can then take that learning that you're getting yourself and actually bring it back to the community for your customers and things like that. So our customers were super interested in knowing the journey we were on because they wanted to learn for us. Gainsight, what are you doing to manage your renewal forecasting given COVID? Gainsight, what are you doing to manage and to measure product adoption better, things like that. So that was all actually it was challenging time, but it was exciting for us to be able to help people by taking some of our internal learning and sharing it.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I know you mentioned in there that you certainly on the sales side have what many people would refer to, I guess, as a sort of typical enterprise engagement. A lot of go to the customer site, probably fairly intensive sets of on-site meetings and so forth, all of which is now being done virtual. So I'm intrigued, how's that affected, the, I mean, obviously there's the economic impact that's sort of macro, but in terms of that shift from an on-site sort of, traditional field-based selling model, now that's being done virtual, particularly with larger customers, has it slowed it down? Has it impacted it at all? Or have you managed to keep the same velocity in the sale?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, that's funny because David, you and I probably met in one of those on-site enterprise cycles years ago in your prior life. And so, that's how we used to do things. We do lots of dinners and go meet customers on site and stuff like that. A couple observations. One is on the sales cycle side, interestingly enough, our sales cycles have shortened. Now that could be partly because people need to retain their customers more. So there's just more need around what we do. But I do think there's some efficiency that you get if you organize things well in this virtual world. So that's something that's worked well. I think that maybe it might be harder to do truly transformational sales, but a lot of those kind of maybe mid-size sales, I think they actually can be more efficient in this world. It's easier, actually, as an example, we often do these executive sessions where we'll go to a client exec team, either potential or current client, and say, we'll bring your whole exec team together to get aligned around customer success and kind of product adoption and things like that. And doing that in the physical world, imagine getting an hour of an entire company's exec team's time. What is that going to take, like 8 years to schedule it before everyone's really free? We started this briefing series about a couple months ago. 100% of clients did it, a lot of public companies, and they love it. And it's easy to schedule, which is eerie, right? That's really interesting. So on the client engagement side, in some ways it's easier because it's easier to coordinate calendars. The second thing is, I think on the marketing engagement side, one of the other things that's kind of interesting, not intuitive, my CMO told me last week, this is the most creative and fun part of her career. And she's been working, 25, 30 years. And I said, why? And she said, well, because we get to reinvent field marketing. So as an example, last week we hosted a cooking class with some of our large customers, and we had some famous chef, who I should know who he is, but he's somebody really famous if you're a foodie. And he taught the class, right? And the week before, they had a cashmere sweater knitting event with some of our customers, right? And another one, they had a shoemaking event, all these things that you would never, ever be able to do in the real world. And so I do think that the thing I tell my team all the time is we've lost a lot in this transition to COVID, but we also gained something too. There's things that are positive, and so we are seeing some positives from this.
Wow, that's really creative. I love it.
Our team's very creative, yeah.
You mentioned, and Mary, you said this earlier too, that the accessibility to people's schedules that ordinarily are very hard to get hold of, whether it's your team or customers, particularly the executive ranks, I guess the time that's given back to their calendar by not being on a plane or transiting around the world, is beneficial. So certainly a common theme from you both on that front. But Mary, how about you? In terms of the sort of engagement with customers, you touched on a little bit earlier, but how has it sort of changed? What are the things that you've seen, being done differently, and how's it affecting the sort of engagement with your customers?
One of the I think most interesting trends is just the uptick in resellers participating in training events. So now that they are saving time, they can use that time to get more educated. And so we've responded with, making it more affordable, because obviously we would like them to be as expert as possible in our technology. So that is one clear benefit, as we've seen that uptick. But, there's some funny situations. I was telling David earlier, we were in a RFP situation, huge, $100+ million deal. And we're in this video call pitching. And can you imagine, you know, in your life having something that significant where you want on multiple airline trips, schmoozing, you know, none of that. It's all from the comfort of my own home. It's very strange.
And I hope you want it too.
Still in process. Don't know yet.
Well, yeah, fingers crossed. It's funny, the creativity, Nick, you were talking about earlier, and some of the different approaches that have been taken with customers. It's really interesting to see how this is, being, spun in a very positive way. And I think the chatting to a bunch of different companies, I've been intrigued about productivity. Have people been able to maintain their productivity? Has there been a dip as people aren't able to sort of collaborate, physically together, or what? And so just give me a sense of, and it doesn't matter which the departments are, but how's sort of productivity holding up for you, in your company? And Mary, we'll jump to you first.
I was alluding to this earlier. I think, where there was an established plan, execution works beautifully remotely. It's when there's some white space, when we need to change something, and particularly trying to think about transformational activities, that just takes a lot longer. And so, as we've been working on our future strategies and things like that, I've been sort of pounding my head against the wall. It's like, if I could lock everybody up for a week in a conference room, I know we would have this knocked out, but it's taken us a couple months, right? Because you meet and then people go off and think about it and then you reiterate. And so, maybe at the end it'll be stickier because, it was a lot of sort of, being very thoughtful and people going away and back and forth and back and forth. But gosh, it's just, I'll be happy when we can get back in the conference room again.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I know I can totally see exactly what you're talking about. When you're locked away on a sort of 2-3 day offsite, going through that longer range planning, the ability to sort of bounce things around and even get responses from people, and you can see the body language of when people are buying in or not buying in, and all those sort of nuances are much more difficult to pick up in a sort of disparate environment. So yeah, that's a really good point. The other thing I think is pretty interesting, you mentioned that the channel partners are sort of lapping up training. I mean, traditionally they all want to be knowledgeable, but it's not the time they give up very easily. So that's quite a good business benefit out of all this, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
So what about you, Nick? Are you seeing the sort of productivity, just the general throughput? How's that been for you?
Yeah, I thought Mary's comments incredibly insightful in terms of some things are better, some not. And actually, just to plus one, the comment of like some things where the in-person interaction is just valuable. I'm very fortunate that my chief product officer and I live in the same town. So we actually go for walking one-on-ones, even though, we don't obviously go to the office anymore. And it's so hard to replace that. I would love to find a way to replace that with technology, but it's been challenging. On the more tactical productivity side, I think what's interesting is it's almost like we're too productive. We can get so much stuff done. And I'm a checklist person. So my calendar is packed to the brim, and we check things like, engineering commits, meaning the code, how much code you put into the system. And it's higher than it's ever been. And, customer engagement meetings are higher than they've ever been. One thing I've been actually trying to do is say, okay, we need to take some time sometimes to be unproductive, because it's a little bit like, it's just like a constant march otherwise. So as an example, in my exec team meeting, which is Monday mornings, I actually just added in this time where we go to breakout rooms and there's no agenda and we just catch up like we would if we were walking into the conference room, because we've lost all of that. So I think the tactical productivity is up through the roof, and that might eventually be a problem.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that last idea as well. Just giving, enabling that, the stuff that happens as you go and grab a coffee in the break.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so difficult to do on a video conference in the same way. So what about you both mentioned sort of working practice changes, that you've put in place, or you've had to put in place with how your sales team and how your folk are engaging with customers. But what have you seen changes in customer needs? I mean, Mary, I was blown away by you saying that, a deal of that size being done completely virtually and is pretty astounding, frankly. But have you seen, I know in your space, there's a lot of demonstrations of the solution, that sort of demo center that you were talking about earlier. how have you seen the customer needs change? Have they been looking for different things? Are they, just tell me a little bit about, changes or otherwise that you've seen from your customers themselves, particularly in winning new customers. I mean, obviously where you've got an existing relationship, it's a little bit different, but if you're trying to get a new customer over the line for the first time, what changes have you seen?
Yeah, I think people are more thoughtful about preparing for the unknown. So are we all going back to the office? What would that look like? How will my business survive? So people are really looking for flexibility in all kinds of things. Can you handle hybrid working environments? Do you have flexible payment terms? Can I sign a series of shorter contracts rather than one big one? Maybe I break a project up into smaller pieces because life is uncertain. So I would say the name of the game is flexibility, both in terms of what they're implementing in the near term and then preparing for a future that may be somewhat uncertain.
That's really interesting, and particularly there, breaking it up into smaller pieces or asking you to do all of it and breaking up into smaller payments. I'm sure that's been asked too. How about with you, Nick? Have you seen any similar changes or different things?
Yeah, totally. I think Mary said it well. The things I'd add in are more focus on time to value, because it's the same thing. People want to do things in small increments, so therefore they want to be able to see value quickly. So that's a big one. And then the other one is, I think, in terms of the priorities in companies, the customers I talk to, the number one priority, good for Mary's business, is collaboration and connectivity. But then after that, I think, is kind of automation and efficiency and scale. Because what I see is a lot of companies that might have businesses that continue to grow, but are a little more reluctant to hire people at a high velocity because of the uncertainty, for the same reasons Mary talked about. And therefore, there's more interest in technology around scale. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a CEO of a prospective customer last week, runs about an 8,000 person company. And he's like, this year is actually going to be tough for his company revenue wise. They sell into kind of the real world, so they're more directly affected. But they're going to spend $100 million on technology initiatives to help them scale, because they want to be ready for next year. And they feel like this year is not going to be great no matter what they do anyways. So they may as well invest for scale for the future. So I thought that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. It's interesting because people talk about the verticals and sort of what are the probability by each vertical and blah, blah, blah. And so we had all kind of written off hospitality, for example. But there are sectors within hospitality that are taking exactly that kind of attitude. This year's going to be bad, but we do have some money. So why don't we think about what we would like to be when the world comes back to life, and put some money on that so we can win the future.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Well done.
Thinking. You both mentioned uncertainty, throughout that, and having led sales for a long time, I've heard this many times before. When economic, travesties, lay out as we sort of seen, and Mary, you mentioned it earlier. If you're someone selling to small, medium business, and there's an increased sort of pressure, or even companies going out of business. Tell me a little bit about how you've reacted to the sales team's inevitable questions about, well, hold on a minute, we can't possibly keep the same quota, right? Both of you.
Both of us are
silent. Go on, Nick. Tell me how did that come up at all, and if so, how did you handle it?
For sure, yeah. I mean, we've been fortunate. I think that for a lot of SaaS kind of digital businesses, there's things that kind of bounce back well. So I think it's not as much of a question now, because a lot of our reps think they can make their number for the year. But yeah, 100% in March, April, there's a question about whether we should lower quotas, lower targets. And what we said was, it's too early to say, and things are changing too fast. And so but we did do some stuff to make it less, easier to manage through. So as an example, we have a kind of a penalty in the commission plan if you get below a certain percentage of attainment. David, you're probably familiar with that in the past. And we took that away, because we were like, we shouldn't penalize people because it's going to be a slow year. And so we did ameliorate some of the negatives in the plan, but we didn't want to lose the striving. And so it turned out, I think now we should be good. But there was a period where there's a lot of discussion about that.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I think also starting to layer on other incentives, as more becomes known. And I think, there's still uncertainty. Is there going to be a second wave, this, that, and the other? So we've tried to augment the standard. We haven't, given up on the plan, but we've started to layer in other types of rewards for the sales teams.
Yeah, and I'd imagine you have a different dynamic as well, because having a channel go-to-market approach, that I imagine that there are channel partners that have different tiering that they're working towards. Did you get any pushback from channel partners saying, hey, can you accommodate or think about, perhaps pushing it out for a longer period or changing any of those?
We haven't had those yet, but it hasn't been time to sort of set your metal level. So, that certainly that could be, we did see particularly in Europe with some of the furloughing and other things that the government was sponsoring, there was kind of a segment of resellers that just went quiet for several months. And so we're starting to see them come back online, which is a welcome sign.
That's great. I think one of the things that's lots of really good takeaways from this and from my perspective, but something that's really encouraging is both of you seem to be seeing reasonable business levels being maintained. There might have been a temporary dip, but then there were some peaks of opportunity that came as a result, and by and large, keeping on track with where you were, which is great to hear. And I hear that a lot too, so it's very encouraging. So a couple of final questions as we sort of look to wind this up. Tell me if you've got any further plans in mind already. Things, obviously there was an initial sort of must change as a result of things. Then there were some things you probably changed as you learned more. Have you got any, without giving away super secrets, have you got any sort of other changes that you're thinking of bringing in? Mary, why don't we jump to you on that?
As I said, as a new CEO, part of my mandate was always to think about the value creation and what is the longer term strategy of the company. And so that is something that we've been hard at work at over the summer and are just now starting to roll out. So we're super excited about that.
What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I think there's probably three things that we've been probably looking ahead to the future on. One is I mentioned this executive engagement. We get a client's exec team together, and we've done about 15, 20 of those so far. I think we're going to be able to get every one of our customers and hopefully a lot of our potential customers in that type of format. It's amazing how effective it is. And it just drives more cross-functional alignment and expansion and so on. So I think that's, if you're watching, that's something kind of executive briefings. I think they're much easier. Number two is this kind of product-led growth concept, which of course we sell that technology to our customers, but doing more and more of that in the product, because our customers just are doing so much more, but they just want to see it all in the product. I think that is the future. And then number three is honestly just constantly learning. Like, it's funny, you probably are similar. Every time we're on an event for another vendor, we're like, did you see what they did there? Did you see how the camera worked? Oh wow, they're using the software. It's incredible. My board meeting, half of our board meeting in the beginning of the meeting was talking about what webcam setups you have and whether you have a DSLR connected and so I think what's kind of interesting is we're all learning from each other. I took so many notes from what Mary said today. And so I think there's just going to be a constant learning and evolution.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And so we've talked a lot about the changes, and things that we've learned along the way. I'm interested, what thoughts do you have? And of course, we're all hoping and looking forward to this day coming, but whether it be through the vaccines when they arrive, or when things begin to return to a pre-pandemic normal, if you want to call it that, what do you see of the changes? Top couple of things that will sort of go back to the same way they were before, and conversely, are there things that you've changed that you go, you know what, even when we're able to spring back to the way it was, we're not actually going to do that. We're going to continue to work in the way we've now become accustomed in the last few months.
We were pretty schizophrenic on our work from home policies. Some managers allowed it, some didn't. But it by and large works. It doesn't work for everything, as we've discussed, but we're going to be much more deliberate about equipping our workforce and putting in policy that this is an option for the majority of jobs. So that, I think that's a fundamental change, but I think that's happening in all kinds of white collar businesses. And I think this sensitivity to the customer and really thinking through our payment policies, our product policies, our support policies to be more flexible is something that's going to endure as well. Just because the world, as we know, can now change on a dime. Today it's the pandemic. If you're in California, it's fires. If you're in India, it's floods. This stuff is happening more and more. And so the more sensitive we can be in how we configure our offerings for our customers, I think the more successful we and they will be.
Yeah, no kidding. And that ability, that agility that you talked about with spinning up greenfield, medical centers, that serves you well for, not just through a pandemic, but all of those different environments you spoke about. What about on your side, Nick? Do you see some things enduring, and others flipping back to the way they were?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the three things on my end, just top of mind, that endure. One is we've always had a pretty flexible work from home policy and distributed model, but I think it wasn't as much of a level playing field. If you were in the office, you still had a little bit more of an advantage. But try to keep more of that level playing field, even if people start going into the office, and some different techniques for that. For example, if you have a big meeting, still have everyone be at their computers, even if they're in the office, so you can see everyone and things like that. So have that feeling like we have now. On the customer engagement side, I think we will absolutely look forward to seeing our customers again in person. I mean, it's honestly, I love it. It's a great feeling. But at the same time, I think that we also will have customers who have liked this new world too. And so I think there'll be a lot more virtual. So instead of being like 100% in person and a webinar every now and then, we will be like a lot of virtual and some in person, and it'll be a healthy mix of the two. And that kind of goes to number three on the personal side, being a little vulnerable. I'm definitely that person who has traveled pretty much every week for the last 20 years or so. And I remember I have 3 kids at home and my wife, and I always told myself, I'm not really missing anything because I'm back for the weekends or whatever. And honestly, I've missed a lot. And it's amazing. And so I don't think I'm going to go back to the same level of travel that I had. I will travel and I'll go see people, but not as much as I did. And if that actually reflects the average attitude of the average executive, what will happen almost by definition then is we'll all say, okay, there's going to be much more of a mix versus everything has to be in person. So.
Yeah, and interestingly, that means in all likelihood, will perpetuate that increased availability of people we're trying to get hold of. So
yeah, that's true.
There's a sort of double bonus, if you like.
Right.
So last question to each of you, and I'll come straight back to you, Nick. What would you if you tried to sum it all up, the experiences you've been through, the tremendous amount of change, there's all sorts of things that have happened, internally and with your customers and in the market in general. What would be the sort of 1 or 2 or 3 sort of key takeaways that you are going to take from this? And you said it's a constant learning environment. What have you learned, or what are the takeaways?
My mental model, and just my personal mental model for COVID-19, is it's obviously a very tough situation, and frankly, very privileged to not bear the brunt of it like a lot of people. But it's in some ways for society, it's just a time machine. It shows us the future of what the world is likely to be. And I think there's some parts of that future that are actually really great in terms of flexibility and, not having to travel all the time and things like that. And there's some parts of the future that we got to figure out how we fix, because we're headed for some really bad things as well. And so I kind of, for my own kind of company, I'm like, well, there's some parts of this future I can accelerate into the present, like flexibility, more digital marketing, et cetera. And there's some parts that I got to watch out for, like mental health as an example. So to me, it is like a time machine.
Same question for you, Mary. What are the sort of 1 or 2 takeaways that you're going to have after this experience or through this experience?
I think a time machine is a great analogy, as well as what Nick was saying about the hierarchy of needs. To me, it's been very clarifying. It's super clear what the priorities are and where you need to focus, and you don't sort of get distracted by a lot of extraneous stuff. You need to keep your employees safe. You need to deliver financial results, and you need to think about how quickly the world is going to shift and how your business needs to adapt to what those shifts are. And in a way, it is sort of invigorating, because there's no sense in hesitating about decisions, right? Move forward with courage and conviction and make the future happen. So it's an invigorating time for sure.
That's awesome.
Well, thank you both. I mean, I've certainly learned a tremendous amount from just chatting with you both. I think that the positive approach that you've both taken, and I've heard that from multiple different companies, embracing the change, reacting to the well, you had no choice but to react, but the speed at which you had to react and to not miss a beat as you go through it. I'm very, encouraged by how you've been able to continue driving business, even Mary, you mentioned very large sales opportunities through a fully or pretty much a fully remote environment. Now, it's not to say that that will always be the case, because I think there is, as you both said, tremendous value, particularly in those sort of larger sales environments, to have more sort of personal on-site engagement with the customers. The learning, I think the things that it sort of reminded us of about, how to engage, how to stay connected, some of the creativity, you mentioned it, Nick, in the marketing, but not just the marketing externally, but how you've both been able to communicate with your own teams and keep them engaged, which is, this is sort of at least from my perspective, somewhat of a honeymoon period when people that used to have a long commute and work in an office are now working from home, and it sort of isn't this great, but it can become very lonely. You miss that collaboration. So having different techniques in how you engage and keep the teams, motivated and committed has been very impressive. So a big thank you to both. I hope that other people will get the same kind of takeaways as I have or more. But I really appreciate you both spending some time and sharing your experiences, and good luck to both of you as we continue to drive through this, and let's keep this going.
Pleasure. Great to meet you, Nick, and great to see you, David.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to meet you, Mary, and David, wonderful session. Thanks. Great questions as well. Thank you.
All right. Cheers to you both.
Okay. Bye-bye.